Hello and welcome to the Slate Political Gabfest. June 5th, 2025, Republicans versus the Big Beautiful Bill edition. I'm David Plotz of CityCast in Washington, D.C. From New York City and CBS Evening News, where he's co-anchor, and CBS Evening News Plus, where he's anchor, John Dickerson. Hello, John.
Good morning, David.
And from New Haven, Connecticut, where she is the co-anchor of Yale University Law School and the anchor of the New York Times Magazine, Emily Bazelon. Hello, Emily.
Hello, hello.
And really the anchor to our sense of self.
That is true. Emily is the
like
anchor.
A lot. I'll take it.
This week on the Gabfest, the interesting intra-party fight about the mammoth budget bill. Will objections from either fiscal hawks or fiscal doves in the Republican Party derail it? Then, can the independent judiciary survive the Trump era? Is Len Leo now persona non grata? Is the Federalist Society an enemy of the Trump state? Then, the travel ban redux. We are going to talk about the Trump administration's new effort, which I'm sure will be successful this time, to keep out people from a dozen countries around the world. Plus, we'll have cocktail chatter.
Comcast is committed to bringing access to the internet to all Americans, including rural communities across the country, like Sussex County, Delaware.
We were being left behind. Everybody around us seemed to have internet, but we did not. High-speed internet is one of those good things that we needed to help us move our farming, our small businesses, our recreation forward.
Learn more about how we're bringing our next-generation network to more people across the country at ComcastCorporation.com/investment in America.
You may get a little excited when you shop at Burlington.
What a low price! You see that? They have my favorite brand! It's like a whole new Burlington! I can buy two!
I'm saving so much! Yeah!
Burlington saves you up to 60% off other retailers' prices every day. Will it be the low prices or the great brands? Burlington. Deals? Brands? Wow! I told you so. Styles and selections vary by store.
Elon Musk, on his way out the door from Washington, although how far out the door of Washington he'll get, we'll find out, has been calling the beautiful bill, I can never remember its name, One Big Beautiful Bill, the One Great Big Beautiful Bill, the Big Blue Marble Bill. He's been calling it an abomination. And Musk is saying this bill is an abomination, seemingly for two contradictory reasons. One reason is he is saying it's an abomination because it's going to add tremendously to the federal debt. CBO estimates are that it's going to add at least 2.8 billion and maybe as much as trillion, at least 2.8 trillion and possibly as much as 5 trillion to an already burdensome national debt. Musk also seems to be objecting because particular bits of pork that he favored, particular bits of government policy that helped his industry, electric vehicles, are being zeroed out in the bill. And that seems to annoy him as well. He is not the only person who objects to this bill. We have a few of the more moderate Republicans, Lisa Murkowski, Susan Collins, and then Josh Hawley, who are objecting to Medicaid provisions, Medicaid cuts, and particularly Medicaid work requirements. And there are Republicans on the more fiscal hawk side, Rand Paul being one, Ron Johnson from Wisconsin being another, both senators, who say this is an untenable bill. It is too costly, and it is raising the national debt way too much for us to be okay with it. So, John, there's always this kind of noise about huge bills, but we have in the Republican caucus in Congress, we've had a lot of compliance and obedience and getting behind what Trump wants. So where is this bill moving? What's happening now that we have the Senate objections coming from left and right and from Musk?
I feel in my head I have this sort of planetary schema where, you have planets of different sizes that are causing gravitational pull on the...
Musk is a gas giant.
Yeah. Well, so you have four players, and you have some quasi-substantive objections, and then you have the soap opera part of it. First of all, we should note that that a budget process that has descended into what is increasingly becoming a kind of, personal quarrel between the president and Musk is, a sign of complete collapse of the representative form of government, where two personalities can get into an emotional back and forth. It's just a massive concentration of power, but we can talk about that later.
Two personalities, neither of whom actually have a vote.
Correct. And one of whom was not elected nor had any oversight. But the leaders in Congress were willing to give him all kinds of power during the Doge days. So in some ways, this is, coming back to bite them. And we should get into that more later. But what's happening with the bill? So as you pointed out, there are these two very contradictory pieces, because the Ron Johnsons and Rand Pauls of the world and the quote unquote fiscal hawks want more spending cuts, but those who care about Medicaid and retaining it don't want the cuts that are already in the House bill. So they're just completely at cross purposes, and the question is which one would buckle and which one, might be able to be kind of convinced. The role that Musk plays in this, I think, matters. I don't think it matters that I can't figure out exactly how it matters in the Senate, frankly. I do see how it matters in the House. If the Senate makes a change to this bill, it has to go back to the House, and the House has to pass whatever the Senate modifications, got it through the Senate. And I think that a few House members, which is all you need to overturn this, would follow Musk and the kind of populist dust he has kicked up. I don't think that plays. I think it causes a lot of drama in the Senate, but I don't see lawmakers who weren't already inclined to either be fiscal hawks or otherwise changing because of Musk.
I'm not clear, John. Is Musk's objection the fiscal hawk objection, or is his Musk's objection, we have the wrong kind of spending, we can't get rid of these subsidies for electric vehicles, or is it both?
I think it might be the latter, but hidden under the former, because I haven't seen him make an explicit case about the EV support that would be cut. And in fact, it makes no sense. If you're being a fiscal hawk, you got to get rid of those, you got to get rid of even more pork. Three things that are happening, by the way. This budget, just another way in which the process has gotten so off the rails, is all of these populist ways that the budget is being talked about is completely measuring the tiniest portions of the budget relative to what a real conversation about the budget would be. So you have, the Speaker of the House talking about waste, fraud, and abuse in Medicaid, which is not as evident, not as big as he's claiming. You have Musk talking about pork in the bill. Pork is a popular thing to talk about, but it's not the real driver of the debts and deficits. So you have all this populist stuff being kicked up. So Musk is talking about pork in the kind of abstract, but he's not naming what kind of pork. And if you were really incensed about the budget or the deficit impacts of this, you would go after the tax cuts, or you would be against the tax cuts for certain brackets, or you wouldn't want to add more tax cuts, which they're adding. But nobody's having that conversation.
Yeah, that part is just extraordinary, to have the fiscal hawks, Rand Paul. It's like we cannot countenance a budget bill that adds this much to the debt. But when you look at what's adding to the debt, it's that there's the extension of these monumental tax cuts, which overwhelmingly favor the wealthy and better off Americans. And then there's addition of other kind of random tax cuts that Trump just wants to put in because he heard that people shouldn't be taxed on tips. And so he's like, okay, we'll do that. And it's just, and it makes no fiscal sense at all. It is not fiscally hawkish. It is just going after spending.
Well, if you're a libertarian, it seems to me you can square that circle, which is to say, I don't want people taking my money for taxes and spending it on the government. So I don't want, I want taxes to be low, and I don't want the government to do very much. And that's the Rand Paul position. So I think that's
right. And
that's consistent.
Isn't that more consistent with kind of traditional Republican thinking, right? You cut taxes and you reduce the deficit, and you believe in supply side Reagan economics, in which the cutting of the taxes is going to raise more revenue, which has often not come to pass. It seems to me like the new part of this dynamic is the idea that you might care about Medicaid cuts, like that your coalition is expanded. There are now 40 states that have expanded Medicaid coverage. And a lot of the people who are going to lose the Medicaid coverage if they put this bill through are the people who live in those states, especially red states. And then there also seem to be senators who are concerned about rural hospitals, like including Jerry Moran from Kansas, right? I mean, people who you don't normally speak up.
And I've talked to a lot of healthcare providers at those rural hospitals, and you're right. That to me has been really interesting because it's not necessarily compassion for the individual Medicaid recipient per se. It's that these hospitals, which are barely
compassion for a hospital.
Well, in a sense,
infrastructure.
Yeah,
right?
Because the hospitals are already A, closing, or B, closing big chunks of them. Between 2011 and 2023, 243 rural hospitals got rid of obstetric services, which means 24% of the obstetric services in rural areas are gone during that period, in part because of these multi-factored budget effects. And so if there's less Medicaid money going out to those rural hospitals, then it's not just the individual recipients of Medicaid who'll be hurt, when the hospital closes, all the people in that community will lose their hospital. And, then you're talking about drives of multiple hours just to get basic care. And of course, there's a fiscal part of this too, which is if the hospital closes, I don't go to my regular checkup, and then everything gets worse. And then I'm going to the emergency room where it's going to cost even more. So that seems to be where that coalition is built.
I mean, I think it's also interesting that the entire sort of fiscal dovish piece of this is concentrated around Medicaid. And when you think about where there are these other cuts, which have huge human costs. I mean, of course, we know like USAID, and they're enormous costs and death and suffering, but those are borne by people who don't live in America for the most part. So fuck them. But then there's the parts that will be borne here, that when wait times at the Social Security office are longer, when weather forecasting is worse, when FEMA is less present to supply help in the case of emergency. Those are all things which, well, in the case of weather forecasting, or in the case of Social Security, or in the case of the provision of emergency services, those are things which Republicans, or the provisions of research, of all the medical research that's being done, the support for NIH, those are all things which, up until very recently, Republicans broadly and overwhelmingly supported those kinds of provisions of the federal government. And now they are just like not interested. They are not interested in talking about the costs of, NIH cannot do 70% of what it used to be doing. Well, that's just good. That's just Doge getting rid of waste, fraud, and abuse. And rather than seeing that as, this is actual damage to the future infrastructure of the United States and to the future health of the United States and to my citizens, they won't talk about that part. They will talk about the Medicaid piece, but that seems to me to be a very narrow part of the overall undermining of government functioning.
I mean, a few Republican senators, to be fair, Lisa Murkowski has been talking about NOAA and the Weather Service. I think some of them are connecting those dots. I mean, I will just go back to my own personal obsession, which is that when the consequences of these cuts are medium to long term, just your use of the word future lets people off the hook in the immediate predicament of, Trump ranting at them or someone running negative ads against them in their state. And that seems to be the calculus. John, do you think that the Republicans, in the Senate who are voicing doubts, I mean, they're really voicing strong doubts that are pretty good fodder for campaign ads for Democrats in 2026, like Josh Hawley talking about, we need to think about who we are and provide relief for working families. Are they all just going to knuckle under in the end? Like, what is going to, it feels so like pressing right now. And yet I guess I just don't really believe that they're not going to pass this.
It's hard to believe that given all the other possible things that could go wrong, that in the midterms, there's a huge groundswell in support of Medicaid recipients, because partially what you've also got, you've got the majority of the Republican Party talking about these reforms are just waste, fraud, and abuse, and it's just making sure that young men in basements don't spend their time playing video games and getting Medicaid beneficiary benefits, which is not either the way the system works, or there's not a great deal of evidence that is anywhere close to the amount of fraud that they're claiming. But I don't see that. And Josh Hawley, I can't imagine any Democrat credibly quoting Josh Hawley, because Josh Hawley has a lot of things that Democrats find so deeply objectionable. I don't think he's a useful. I think that what intrigues me in terms of who's drawing lines in the sand is that the moderates and the Medicaid, people who care about Medicaid can probably be massaged to yes somehow, because they just tend to be the kinds of, they're moderates. So they don't take stands and burn the bridges. Rand Paul does burn Rand Paul, it's very possible that he could not vote for this in the end. Ron Johnson, he says he's not going to move and not going to budge, but is that actually true? One of the things that used to solve these kinds of problems in the past is you'd say to the fiscal hawks, okay, you're right, the debt and deficit are too large. Let's have a big commission, and we'll name you to the commission, and we'll do that to take on these larger questions of Medicare growth and all that. That's not even, like, those have failed so many times, and Washington doesn't work that way in any way, nobody even believes the fiction that people could get together in a room and put together a deal like they did during the Bush administration. So you can't use that to get out of this pickle either. So I don't know what happens, but I do just want to say one quick thing is that it is, I think, notable that the leaders in Congress thought that Elon Musk had this kind of singular wisdom that he could survey the entire executive branch and know how to lop off massive portions of the executive branch with precision and expertise. And now they're like, oh, he's too dumb to understand how budgets work. Like, they're now saying he's a total moron and doesn't understand that there really won't be the deficit impacts that he claims here. And, they handed over basically their prerogatives and power to him and Doge. And now, they would like them back. So they're faced with, a situation in part of their own making.
Is Musk just trying to get a tax break for Tesla? What is he doing?
John says no. Were you listening? John said no.
I was, but I just don't believe it.
But if he is, how is this is not the way you would go about it. You would do it quite. I mean, he's not even explicitly saying this. So, like, how does that go forward? Because those are going to have the wrong. That's going to move the debt and deficit in the wrong direction, allowing those tax breaks and inducements for purchasing of EVs.
I am very skeptical that any deficit hawkness will ever win out in the end and on anything, because if you look at the history of the deficit and debt in the United States, there are really zero examples of fiscal hawkishness ever winning, because the deficit and debt people find boring and confusing, and the American public doesn't see it. And when you talk about those medium and long-term impacts, they are medium and long-term impacts, like the effect on interest rates, the crowding out of private investment, all that stuff sort of happens down the road. And it's also, you can't attribute it directly to one particular thing. You can't, the way you can attribute a Medicaid cut to an actual act that the government did and someone dies, that you can point to, but like, oh, the interest rates are 1/10 of a point higher than they would have been, and that has X effect on the macroeconomy. No one pays attention to that. So that's number one. Number two, I am just curious what you guys think with Musk's departure. So there was this hypothesis, which you were just talking about, John, that Musk is going to come in, he's going to identify all this wasteful government spending, and we're going to get rid of. I mean, he began with the claim he was going to get rid of $2 trillion in government spending. Then he reduced it to $1 trillion. I think ultimately he said it was going to be $150 billion. And it turns out, like by the best estimate, it's maybe $60 billion. Best case estimates, maybe $60 billion, but actually it's probably not, because they've spent a lot of other money. And plus, in the course of that, you've damaged a lot of things, which will ultimately cost money to fix. So who knows if it did anything. Do you think that this hypothesis that government is always so wasteful and can be squeezed, do you think people now believe that more, or they believe it less now that Musk has done this?
Oh my God, that's such a great question. I think it's this is this question we keep coming back to again and again. Where's the new political gravity and what causes it to kick in? We saw, as we talked about things like in immigration broadly, the president had and has support for extreme acts of reducing migrants at the border and undocumented immigrants in the United States. But there is a place where he goes too far, the Kilmer Abrego Garcia case and some of these other high profile cases in which the public said, no, we may want you to do this thing, but you've gone too far. And so that has been the case with immigration. Is there an equivalent with government spending? People want, waste, fraud, and abuse, these dumb programs. But then because of both the way the cuts were made and the places where the cuts were made, and the fact that those long-term impacts are in the long term, but when you can't figure out where the hurricanes are going to go, and then you have days and days of coverage of people who were walloped by a hurricane and couldn't get out of town because they didn't get the warning or something. I think you have the potential for this to actually have political consequences. And I think also the soap opera, which I think is I think is harmful to good governance. Nevertheless, the soap opera between Musk and Trump has now gotten people to pay attention to the budget. Maybe not in an intelligent way or in a smart way or in a way that's ever good, but to the extent that you're exactly right, David, about people's lack of interest in the budget. I've lived a career of it. But now there's a chance people are paying attention. And so what happens in that instance, if you have a conversation about those things that are being cut, I think that has a possible political downside.
Who would have guessed that we'd reach the point in Trumpism when Leonard Leo, the Federalist Society mastermind, in some ways the most effective conservative activist leader of the last 25 years, would be getting nasty gram attacks from President Trump. Trump, annoyed at a court calling foul on his invocation of a national emergency to impose tariffs, is now lashing out at judges broadly. And of course, he's been lashing out at judges a lot generally, but now he's encompassed the Federalist Society in this. Trump doesn't like the very small, modest, and mostly ineffectual ways that judges have tried to hold him to law and constitution. And Trumpists are angry about the idea of judicial independence when judicial independence means trying to stop Trump from doing what he wants. So, Emily, why go after the Federalist Society and Len Leo now? They got him elected effectively in 2016. What is it that Trump is trying to accomplish? And is there a greater threat to judicial independence than we thought there was a week ago or a month ago?
Yes, I think there is a greater threat. And I think what's going on seems partly personal. Trump and Stephen Miller don't like that Leo took credit for a lot of judicial nominations. They also resented that the Federalist Society stayed out of all of the prosecutions of Trump and the impeachment fights. The organization just kept its distance. And that in this moment where if you were truly MAGA, you were supposed to be out there rattling sabers on behalf of Trump. They didn't do that. And then also Leo, who sits on $1.6 billion, this enormous gift that he has. He didn't give any money to Stephen Miller's legal, public interest, in quotes, operation that he was running before Trump was elected. So I think those are the beefs. But what is kind of more fundamental here is whether courts are going to remain independent from the agenda of the president who picks them, right? I mean, you can say a lot of things about the Federalist Society and how it was going to change the law. It was on the terrain of courts have a job to do called judicial review, and they are supposed to have separation from the politicians who appoint and support them. They are doing a thing called law that is different from politics, and the conservative legal movement is built around legal principles. Now, you can say that that's all a big excuse and results oriented and has lots of hackery in it, but that was the proposition. I mean, now we have Trump, in addition to bashing Leo, the thing that really jumped out at me this week. So Trump nominated Emile Beauvais, who was his personal lawyer, has a high up position in the Justice Department, is responsible for unraveling the prosecution of Eric Adams that caused several very respected people in the U.S. Attorney's Office in New York to resign. He's that guy. And so Trump nominates him to the Third Circuit, which is the Court of Appeals in Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and one other state that is out of my head. And then he says that Emile is smart, tough, and respected. Okay, fine. He says he will end the weaponization of justice, restore the rule of law, also fine, and do anything else that is necessary to make America great again. Okay, so Emile Beauvais is going to be on the court to be the MAGA judge. And that is just totally erasing the boundary between law and politics. And it means that Trump is being very clear that the courts are supposed to serve his will. That is their job. And this is very consistent with rhetoric from J.D. Vance and Stephen Miller in the next couple weeks, that when the courts challenge executive orders, they're doing something illegitimate. I mean, that is Vance's theory. And there is a lot of frustration right now. I mean, because the Trump executive orders have been so aggressive, they've been losing a lot in court, and they've been losing more. They lost 53% of the petitions in February, and it's up to 96% in May. So you can see why the Trump people are frustrated. Now, of course, they're not like doing any soul searching about what it is about these orders that's causing more than 70% of Republican appointed judges, along with more than 80% of Democratic appointed judges, to rule against them. But anyway, that's what's going on here. And the core issue is whether we are going to continue to have an independent judiciary.
Well, they're not doing soul searching, but they have found an enemy. Like, in other words, they're right, so the judges must be wrong. So we must get judges that are even more, or that are in this new mold than even conservative. Like, conservative that's no longer useful. It's now got to be MAGA.
Exactly. It's not conservative. It's Trump. It's doing Trump's bidding and affirming Trump's orders. And that, we have three branches of government. Judges, once they are on the bench, they do not see themselves as tools of the president. That is really not their identity. They have a strong institutional sense of themselves as independent and of serving the rule of law. And that is very deep in conservative, circles in law world as well as liberal ones.
So John, Republican members of the House and Senate have taken an oath to uphold the Constitution, yet we see them acting in a kind of extremely obedient, court-like way towards Trump and Trumpism. Judges have taken a vow to uphold the Constitution, not acting in nearly the same way. Conservative judges who undoubtedly have voted for Republicans their whole life and who have come out of conservative circles are not acting nearly the same bended knee sort of way. The knees are bent much less. Why is that? What is it about being a judge that is causing these folks to not capitulate in the same way that Republican House and Senate members are? This episode of the Gabfest is sponsored by Home Chef. I was just thinking this morning, I have to make dinner tonight, and I just don't know what to make, because finding inspiration to make a delicious dinner every night is a real challenge. But I got a cheat code, friends. Home Chef. Home Chef is here to make searching for new meals and cooking a new dish something to look forward to. I have absolutely loved cooking with Home Chef recently, especially with my 16-year-old son, Gideon, who is a sous chef, or sometimes I'm his sous chef. We made a tofu banh mi inspired rice bowl with sriracha mayonnaise last week. So delicious. But Home Chef has everything you and your family need for hassle-free, delicious dinners. And with over 30 options a week, they cater to a variety of dietary needs. And that's why users of leading meal kits have rated Home Chef #1 in quality, convenience, value, taste, and recipe ease. Super easy recipes. Very, very well-designed recipes. For a limited time, Home Chef is offering Gabfest listeners 50% off and free shipping for your first box, plus free dessert for life. Go to homechef.com/Gabfest. That's homechef.com/Gabfest for 50% off your first box and free dessert for life. Homechef.com/Gabfest. Must be an active subscriber to receive free dessert. This episode of the Gabfest is sponsored by Bombas. Summer's here. We're all chasing something, a break, a goal, a vibe. But while you're chasing, don't let bad socks and blisters ruin the chase. Bombas makes socks and now slides and seamless essentials that keep up with whatever your summer looks like, whether you're running a marathon or just a few errands. I wear Bombas socks basically daily, wearing them now. Love them. I love my Bombas socks, especially in warm weather, because they are super breathable. I don't like a hot sock, and Bombas socks, they are grippy They're super grippy, which I love. So I feel like my foot is ensconced, but they also are airy, amazing quality. And Bombas doesn't stop at socks. They have fresh white tees, waterproof slides for the beach, buttery soft, sweat-wicking underwear for head-to-toe comfort. Best of all, Bombas items don't just feel good, they do good, because one purchased equals one donated to someone who needs it. Head over to bombas.com/political and use code political for 20% off your first purchase. That's BOMBAS.com/political, code political at checkout. Bombas.com/political, use code political.
Allowing for the fact that not all judges and all people involved in law are, pure as the driven snow. Nevertheless, they are engaged in a competition in which reason and argumentation and marshaling facts to your argument and an adversarial process in which those arguments can be beaten up is still the way that most of the activity in that realm takes place. And so you have to have a set of ideas and thoughts and beliefs that can participate in that competition. In politics, it's purely power. The partisan nature of our politics, plus all the things we've talked about over the last 20 years, the big sort, gerrymandering, the role of money, all of those things have increased the extent to which you no longer need to make cogent arguments. In fact, making cogent arguments and being stuck on the facts and kind of the reality as it presents itself to most humans waking up in the morning is not that effective. And in fact, if you have a kind of, and this is where it does remind us of what we used to say about lawyers. But if you have an ability to say that an apple is an orange and that up is down, you can increase the amount of money you get, the cheers you get. And now that we're in an increasingly populist mode, your ability to mislead people is really the key to accumulating and holding on to power. And when we see somebody like Joni Ernst, the senator from Iowa, respond to constituents saying that the Medicaid cuts are going to kill people by saying, well, everybody dies, that's a real change in the way politicians operate. There's a different market now where you can basically you can say things like that and it doesn't cripple your career. In the law, you're still a part of a group that applauds you and favors you if you hold on to these ideas of reason and argumentation. And I think that all, and also, as Emily has mentioned, there's a strong conservative legal clubhouse that believes in those things. And so it believes in reason and argumentation. You may think they're all wrong, but they still believe in those things and you get applause for that. And if you get engaged in that process, you want those applause.
What's interesting, though, to me is that you're totally right about that clubhouse, John, and that is predominant, certainly on the bench, but it's no longer unchallenged. I mean, part of what's going on here is this internal power struggle in Republican circles. There's this organization called the Article 3 Project. A guy named Mike Davis runs it. He was a Gorsuch clerk. He was Gorsuch's shepherd through the nomination process. And he is very online, MAGA, strong presence. And clearly part of what's happening here is he wants more power. And in order for that to happen, the Federalist Society needs to have less. And so it's like very personal online. People are ripping into each other on the right, representing these different points of view. And I think it's, it's this struggle that we see in different parts within the administration as well, right? Where you have figures like Russ Vought, who's very tied to Project 2025 and Heritage, and Stephen Miller. They're the most clear, determined voices for this MAGA agenda that is just inconsistent with a lot of traditional conservative principles about upholding the status quo and stability and having some value that has to do with the republic or the democracy as opposed to just the fortunes of Trump and his movement.
Emily, what you're describing, it sounds like that the destruction of judicial independence or the undermining of it has to be a kind of one by one. Every time there's a judicial opening, it's a judge who's in a Aileen Cannon mode instead of a Amy Coney Barrett mode. Like that's what you're saying.
Well, yes. And interestingly, there are, I think it's something like 40-something vacancies left over that Trump can fill. But so far, they've been slow in actually nominating people. And the first couple of picks seemed like the more traditional conservative camp. Emile Beauvais, who we were talking about earlier, is a real break from that. And in response to the Beauvais nomination, another player in this conservative legal world, Ed Whalen, who was instrumental in backing Brett Kavanaugh, but is from the more old school world, he criticized Beauvais and then said that he's been talking to senior appellate judges who are not going to retire because they're going to be worried that Trump is going to replace them with hacks. And so obviously there's this attempt to say, well, President Trump, if you go too far, then you're not going to really have any vacancies to fill because the Republican appointed judges who would have trusted you to replace them aren't going to do that anymore. We'll see how much all of that plays out. I mean, I think lots of factors go into retirement, is my sense from talking to various people in this world. But, you know, the larger point is the judiciary can maintain its independence, and I think will for some amount of time, right? But it is tied to the political system. And so if Trump does get hundreds of appointments over 4 years, if a Republican president succeeds Trump and continues in this vein, then the judiciary is going to change. And when you look at a country like Hungary and its kind of descent toward authoritarianism and away from a healthy democracy, the judges put up a strong fight at first, 4 years. Like they really did. But eventually they get swamped. Like they cannot save the democracy on their own without support from the other branches. And so I think, you know, some of what we're seeing in written opinions from judges who are blocking some of the Trump orders is a kind of call out to Congress. Like, where are you, Congress? To go back to, you know, what you guys were just talking about, because Congress as a branch is not sticking up for its institutional prerogatives. And without Congress, the idea that the judges are going to stop the executive branch, it's really not a position, right? I mean, especially because they rely on the executive branch to enforce their orders. It's just not going to work.
I mean, I do think there's a second way in which judicial independence could disappear because, as you say, there will be sort of an accretive decline in the number of independent judges and an increase in the number of judges who are acting from purely hackish MAGA principles, and that will undermine it. It seems to me that we're in the midst of a different kind of end to judicial independence or loss of judicial independence that you just hinted at, Emily, which is that you don't necessarily need the judicial branch to cave and capitulate. You just need the judicial branch to not be able to do anything. So we cited Kilmar Abrego Garcia a little while ago, and the people saying stop, don't do that. Kilmar Abrego Garcia, I think, is still in El Salvador.
Yes, he is.
Like there have been repeated judicial orders, which in under circumstances, everyone would have said like, oh, they have been ordered to do X, they have been ordered to do Y, and X and Y would have been happened. And what's been happening is that either judges are so afraid of their orders being countermanded that they're not actually ordering X, they're ordering kind of X and allowing the Trump folks a space to not do X. Or judges have ordered X and the Trump folks have said they didn't order X, sorry, and we're not doing it. And so it seems to me that judges can lose their independence because the people who embody the court, the judges themselves, are now acting on behalf of the president, or they can lose their independence because they are trying to do the right thing. They're trying to accomplish what they want to accomplish, but their orders are not enforced.
Yeah, I mean, that problem of outright defiance in the Abrego Garcia case and other deportation cases is real. And because it's all unfolding in front of our eyes, it's hard to tell where it leads, right? Like there is a universe in which the Trump administration defies court orders without admitting that it's doing that, I should add, in these deportation cases, but that doesn't bleed into other areas of American law. And then there's another scenario in which this is just like the test case and we start seeing it all over the place. There are other kinds of cases in which there's lots of gamesmanship and kind of foot dragging going on by the Trump administration and not normal lawyering behavior where you do your utmost to reassure the judge that, of course, you respect his or her authority or in doing everything you can to carry out the order. But it's not defiance. And so you're absolutely right that there is a threat, not just rhetorically, but from the actual conduct of the government in court. And judges are wrestling with that, but it's also still playing out, right?
Yeah.
Because part of it has to do with the lower court orders. There's also the question of, appealing up to the Supreme Court. What happens at that stage in some of these cases? The Supreme Court, in the deportation cases has been requiring some due process that these immigrants have not received. And so I don't think you see the courts cowed at the moment, but they are wrestling with what you do with the government that doesn't just do what you say.
And I also wonder what role, how vital Trump is to this change. I mean, one thing I'd love someday is to understand what a MAGA judge is relative to a conservative judge. I mean, other than maybe just someone who does what Donald Trump wants. But if that's true, then how does that carry on when Donald Trump is gone? We've seen that there is a MAGA movement in politics because it's connected to the sort of populism. And so those characteristics I talked about earlier, those can live without Donald Trump, although some people don't carry it off so well. So I wonder how the MAGA legal establishment continues on without him, when many of your ways to distinguish yourself from conservatives or from the traditional judicial system are defined by these fights that Donald Trump is having. If he's gone, what are the defining fights? What are they based around?
I mean, John, don't you think the answer to that right now is like MAGA judges would, first of all, they would approve Trump's order ending birthright citizenship, which the current Supreme Court made clear at oral argument without ruling on it that they were not interested in. And then the second thing is you say Trump can run for office a third time and that provision of the Constitution doesn't hold. And then there is no end to Donald Trump, or it's far enough away that then you just like embrace whatever, authoritarian succeeds him. I'm now like in kind of dark
That's a little bit alarmist.
Yeah.
I think that's a little alarmist, Emily.
You can say that it's alarmist, but I think if you ask like, what is the mindset of these people? Like, I think is where, I think
I know,
but
Trump is not immortal. So he's a 78-year-old man.
Well,
so it's also the
that
case like that one day there will not be Trump. Even if there's some distortion of the Constitution, he gets a third term. He can't live forever, I think.
I mean, I do understand that, yes. But what I'm saying is
because Joni Ernst has told us we are all going to die.
Oh, that's right. I feel better now. Thank you, Joni. My point is just that you can get a long way down the path away from traditional, American law, constitutional law that is in this MAGA vein that would really change the country.
But I think John's point is really important. I think in some ways, the thing that keeps me solaced at night sometimes is the idea that Trump has an extraordinary villainous charisma that nobody else that we see in MAGA world or in the Republican world has. And that's not to say that someone couldn't emerge with it. It's not to say it is unimitable, but it is encouraging to me that there is basically nobody in American politics who has anything like Trump's combination of sociopathy and charisma and, aggression. And that's good.
I hear you, and I don't really want to be like going down this dark, terrible doomsdaying path that I don't know and I hope is not going to unfold. But I mean, you're assuming that we're going to keep having fair and free elections. I mean, you could do a lot of things to make that harder to pull off. You can change, who holds those reins of power, and that would be able to continue people winning who are not necessarily like really have majority support, or you just entrench these values in a way where you have a kind of slow descent into, right? I mean, that's the Hungarian
story. That's what I was trying to locate is what is the set of values that need to be entrenched that would exist post Donald Trump. So in the birthright citizenship case, what I guess I was positing is a world in which there's no President Trump and somebody else takes on the case of birthright citizenship. I think they would be, without Donald Trump's charisma that David described and his support in the population, would they have the same success, this other person? And I'm not sure that they would. Your argument is that you can install a lot of this mindset and then it just becomes a maintenance of power thing.
My argument is just that I don't want to take steps down this road. Like, yes, maybe we can get off the road. I hope so, but I'm not.
I guess what I'm trying to figure out is what is a MAGA judge absent Donald Trump? Like, what do they believe? Is it just do stuff to maintain power?
Well, I'll give one more example, and then I think we should stop, which is the law firm orders, right? I mean, they were resoundingly rejected in the courts. There are 3 different rulings saying that the law firms, because they have First Amendment rights and all the other rights that we talked about, that Trump cannot just basically cut them off at the knees. And 2 of those orders are from, a Reagan appointee and a George Bush appointee, if I recall correctly, who appointed those Republican judges. And so you don't have those rulings anymore. And that deals a different kind of blow to civil society. There's the challenges that Harvard is bringing. There are a number of fronts, right? The funding freeze cases, like judges have put a lot of obstacles. They've been doing a lot of slow rolling of the Trump MAGA agenda. And okay, maybe when Trump is gone, then they don't have as clear an allegiance, but I still think you could do a lot of damage along the way.
Today's episode is sponsored by Smart Travel, a new podcast from NerdWallet. You know that feeling when you're trying to book a trip, too many choices, too much fine print, and no real way to know if you're actually getting the best deal? Smart Travel helps you skip that stress and book with confidence. On Smart Travel, NerdWallet's travel journalists break down the financial side of travel with research-backed insights. They compare perks, costs, and trade-offs to help you travel and spend smarter. The nerds cover topics like which airport lounge memberships are worth it, and which ones just give you stale crackers and a crowded power outlet. Curious to know which airline fees are actually avoidable and which ones aren't? Turn to the nerds. They even talk about how to maximize your hotel points for real savings, not just free bottled water, and when trip insurance is worth it. So if you're trying to figure out whether that fancy travel credit card justifies the annual fee, or if it's just a really expensive way to flex at the airport, give the nerds a listen. Before you book, learn how to get the most out of your travel dollars. Follow Smart Travel on your favorite podcast app, and stay tuned at the end of the episode to hear the Smart Travel trailer. This show is sponsored by BetterHelp. Men today face immense pressure to perform, to provide, to keep it all together. So it's no wonder that 6 million men in the US suffer from depression every year. And it's okay to struggle. Real strength comes from opening up about what you're carrying and doing something about it, so you can be at your best for yourself and everyone in your life. So if you're a man and you're feeling the weight of the world, talk to someone. With over 35,000 therapists, BetterHelp is the world's largest online therapy platform, having served over 5 million people globally. It's convenient too, because you can join a session with a therapist at the click of a button, helping you fit therapy into your busy life. As the largest online therapy provider in the world, BetterHelp can provide access to mental health professionals with a diverse variety of expertise. Talk it out with BetterHelp. Gabfest listeners get 10% off their first month at betterhelp.com/Gabfest. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/Gabfest. This episode of the Gabfest is brought to you by Smalls. Is your cat ready for a diet upgrade? Then you need Smalls cat food, named the best overall cat food by Cats.com. Smalls cat food is packed with ultra-high protein and made with preservative-free ingredients, giving your cat the high-quality meat they deserve, and it's delivered right to your door. After switching to Smalls, 88% of cat owners reported noticeable improvements in their cat's overall health. And the team at Smalls is so confident your cat will love their product, you can try it completely risk-free. Give your cat the food they deserve. For a limited time only, because you're a Gabfest listener, you can get 35% off Smalls, plus an additional 50% off your first order by using code GABFEST. That's an additional 50% off when you head to smalls.com and use promo code GABFEST. Again, that's promo code GABFEST for an additional 50% off your first order, plus free shipping at smalls.com. On Wednesday, the Trump administration announced a new travel ban. You probably remember travel ban 1, 2, and 3 from the first Trump administration. It's the effort to prevent people from certain countries, usually majority Muslim countries, but not always, from entering the U.S. at all. And after several rounds of legal jujitsu back in the first Trump term, ultimately Supreme Court allowed a version of a travel ban to get through. I'm sure Emily will explain what that happened shortly. This new travel ban says that people from countries such as Equatorial Guinea, Afghanistan, Iran, Venezuela, Haiti, Somalia, Yemen, the DRC cannot enter the United States at all. And this is an absolute, thou shalt not pass. Doesn't matter what your purpose is. You are just not coming to this country. And I think the nominal reason is, it's a threat of terrorism. Always there's a threat of some emergency. As far as I know, there's not a single example of terrorism carried out in the United States by someone from Equatorial Guinea, but I'm not a scholar of this, but I think that's probably pretty true. And there are thousands and hundreds of thousands of people from these countries who've been living and settling in this country, visiting this country, have relatives in this country who have done it and contributed to our society and, been able to be with their families in a way that we all applaud, and yet they will not be allowed to continue that. So, Emily, is there any reason to think that this is legally invalid in the way that the early Trump travel bans were invalid? Those were invalid because they were sort of targeted solely at Muslims, right?
Well, right. I mean, they started out with this ban in which it was almost all predominantly Muslim countries. And so then the court said, well, that's motivated by religious discrimination, the lower courts. And then the Trump administration went back and they kind of did it differently and better. They said, look, we went through all this kind of review process. We are pointing to these legitimate reasons. And ultimately, the Supreme Court upheld the third version of the travel ban. And what was going on in those cases was this question of, how do courts deal with pretext? Like, you started with something that looked like religious discrimination. Then if you go back and do it again, supposedly following the rules, do we really think that you care about following the rules? And the Supreme Court essentially refused to look under the hood and said, this is good enough. So, also, presumably, the second Trump administration learned the lessons of the problems with the first ban, and this one is probably more like the version that the Supreme Court ultimately upheld. Just the list of countries is broader, so I guess that's a starting point. I mean, this is going to, as you were starting to talk about, cause a lot of suffering to people, and it is absolutely a determination that is based on their nationality. It just is the kind of blanket order that Trump seems to really relish because it makes him seem powerful, but it just seems very much at odds with trying to solve real problems.
Yeah, I mean, the thing about it is, if you ever talk to someone who lives in a country that isn't, say, the United Kingdom or France, where you just come to the United States, no problem. But someone who is coming from a smaller country or more remote country or poor country, they go through an immensely long, arduous process to get a visa to get into the United States, even a travel visa. You can't just show up. If you're from Haiti, it is not simple to just be like, oh, I'm going to go to the United States for the weekend. It's going to be amazing. You can't do that. You are interviewed. They're making sure that your background is okay, and there's a very rigorous check. And so the people who end up getting visas to come to the United States are generally people who have met a lot of criteria. They have jumped through a lot of hoops. It's a pretty valid, good reason for them to be coming here. So this is just an act of punishment for all these people who broadly speaking have a very good reason to come to the United States, whether it's a family reason, whether it's a professional reason, a reason of medical emergency. Instead, we're going to lose them. And it's a broad brush prejudice against these folks for, what gain? For a gain of some illusory gain of homeland security, which I don't think there's any evidence that actually increases the security of the nation.
Yeah, and if you look at some of the countries on the list, I mean, Sudan, Afghanistan, these are places with terrible suffering going on in them. And as you started out by saying, I mean, no evidence that these are hotbeds of anti-American terrorism. So, yeah. I mean, Trump said that, these people haven't been vetted properly. And so he said, we don't want them, in quotes. But of course, you could vet people in all the ways that you're talking about, and they already do that.
And I just want to return to the people of Afghanistan in particular. There's an act of just specific, particular malevolent cruelty in the way we've treated the people of Afghanistan, who we engaged in a war in Afghanistan for many years, and many thousands of people helped us out in that war. And some of those people were allowed to make it to the United States and had a form of refugee and protected status in the United States. Trump took that away for 9,000 people who had been allowed to leave the country and come to the United States, who had been hugely helpful to us and risked their own lives to help the United States in Afghanistan. And those people are now at risk of deportation back to Taliban-controlled Afghanistan, where they will be undoubtedly under tremendous threat and pressure if they have to go back. So there are those folks. And now we're saying that all these other thousands of people who live in Afghanistan, who helped us, who've been trying to get here. There's a story, I think, in Nick Kristof column, I think it's Nick Kristof, today in the New York Times, about somebody who helped the United States, who's been in line to enter the United States for a long time, who now has no chance because no one from Afghanistan will be allowed. And there are all these people who literally put their lives on the line for us, who put their lives on the line for U.S. soldiers, helped save the lives of American soldiers, helped work with us to advance our interests at enormous risk. And what do? We say, you're a presumed terrorist. You cannot come here. You cannot take part in this dream that you put your life on the line to help advance. It's disgusting. It's just disgusting. But not surprised, I suppose. Have you heard, Emily, of any legal challenges to this yet?
There will be legal challenges, absolutely. I don't know who they're coming from, but yes, people will try to get this overturned, country by country, if nothing else.
It's interesting. Like, last point on this is it comes right in the wake of the attack in Boulder by an Egyptian immigrant, and the Trump administration is attempting to collective punishment expel his family, despite no evidence that they were involved in this attack, but that's a separate issue. And I suppose this is a pretext, but Egypt is not on this. Egypt is not banned here.
Right. I mean, I don't want to suggest that it should be, but yes, there is that inconsistency.
I do think that this is, there's a way in which, as a matter of politics, this is going back to a familiar well, that in connection with the attack in Boulder, it brings the conversation to, good territory for the president, who's by the way, having some bad, right. The economy and the tariffs thing is not going so well. It's going quite poorly, actually. And to the extent that the war in Ukraine hasn't ended, and you can see an easy case for this being purely a political act. I'm not, it might have multi-factor reasons, but I think it feels like it's coming into that context as well.
Let's go to cocktail chatter when you are bemoaning the state of the world and self-lubricating with a gin. John, I tried to make a gin martini for myself this week. God, that felt like an error. Whoa. I don't know. How do you drink that?
In the error, in the sense that you were making it, you were only making one? Or
I was like, I'm going to try a gin martini. John Dickerson loves a gin martini. I'm going to make it, instead of my usual vodka martini, I'll make a gin martini. I did something which I don't think I've ever done as an adult, is I threw out alcohol. I was like, this is terrible, and I remade it as a vodka. Well,
I don't think I can convince you. I think if you didn't like it, you didn't like it. And right. I think it's a wonderful testament to there's no accounting for taste in my case. So. But I mean, basically, I think the many years of drinking them is probably one way to develop. Is probably one.
It's true. It's true. It's true. I might submit to that hardship in order to tolerate it.
I'm sure if they're right. I'm sure there was a time in my youth, some preschool or whatever, when they didn't taste. Actually, that's not true. I remember when I was a kid, I used to drink ginger ale out of the same kind of glass that my dad drank a martini out of, because it was the only thing in the bar that I could have. And I remember once mistakenly picking up his martini. My parents drank quite a lot, and being revolted by it. So there was at least at some point in my life in which that was the case. Although,
isn't it interesting, because we all have children who are now sort of just before or just after the age when you're legally allowed to drink, and watching them, I don't know what your children's drinking habits are, but watching my children go from finding alcohol to be this anathema to enjoying certain forms of it, and literally seeing in real time when they will try something, say it's disgusting, and then you see them a year later and they try it and they clearly are getting some pleasure out of it. is interesting.
Yeah, that's part of the, watching them become adults in all these small, tiny stylistic ways.
Can we now wrap up cocktail chatter? Because it really was just about cocktails.
It was just about cocktails. No, but I have some things to say. What's your chatter, Emily? You have some grim thing. It's always grim.
I have two grim things. Maybe you should save me because we're having such a nice, spirited conversation. But no, I'll just end the party right now. I mean, I'm sorry, I can't let the week go by without noting. Trump has now ordered his attorney general to investigate Biden and his aides. That is directly interfering with the Justice Department in order to carry out this personal vendetta. And I'm sure that because Trump himself was criminally investigated by Biden's Justice Department, this was inevitable, but it is a real ratcheting up of the weaponization of the Justice Department, because the pretext here is the idea that Biden wasn't actually making the orders, doing the pardons that he did as president. So anyway, that's happening. And another thing that distressed me this week was that the Trump administration ordered an end to the Biden guidance about the law, EMTALA, that governs emergency care applying to pregnancies with serious complications in states that have these really total bans that make it so that, women are being airlifted out of hospitals in those states because they have really threatening conditions, but a doctor isn't willing to say that they are on the brink of death because the doctor doesn't want to be criminally prosecuted under the abortion ban. And I just want to note, the history of this. If you go back to the 19th century, there were abortion bans on the books. There were a lot of them. But what a couple of researchers have found, Reva Siegel, Mary Ziegler, who are both law professors, those bans were not total in the same way. They had actually more discretion for doctors in them than the current laws that we're seeing in states like Idaho and Texas. And so, the notion that what the Trump administration wants to do is make it easier for the states to enforce those bans in ways that put women and doctors in these really excruciating positions. That's quite something.
Did you see, by the way, Emily, in the spirit of undoing everything the Biden administration did or turning anything that Biden did into punishment, the people that Biden pardoned off death row are all being sent to the Supermax, the Florence Supermax, which is one of the most unpleasant places on earth to serve out their sentences. So these are men who were serving in other federal prisons. And, there's no evidence that these men they're all convicted and
murderers, convicted
enough to be on death row, but no more than that. It's just a pure act of spiteful vengeance. We can't execute them. Well, let's make their life hell on earth, even insofar as we can, by sending them to the Supermax.
Yes.
Which is also very expensive to send people there. Much more expensive to serve there than other prisons, but whatever.
Exactly. But whatever. And meanwhile, we'll have the pay-to-play pardons, which will be continuing.
John Dickerson, a chatter.
Two quick chatters. One is from the Great Economist podcast. It is about violence in Wales, which fell from 450,000 incidents a year in the early 2000s to 150,000 incidents.
Wait, are you talking about the animals?
The country
whales?
Violence among the animals whales has been pretty much constant. But anyway, in the country whales, they found that there's something called glassings. And what glassings are is that somebody basically takes a beer bottle, breaks it, and then gets when everybody's all hammered and then goes after somebody and cuts them. So what happened is this professor at Cardiff University developed a kind of glass that would shatter safely. And that basically that's one of the reasons that the crimes are down in Wales so significantly is basically, there are other reasons too. Young people aren't drinking the same way, and the police have changed their policing, but that the decline in glassings and other alcohol fueled injuries.
It's like auto glass. He made beer out of auto glass.
So I love that, and it was just well told on The Economist. The other thing is that apparently U.S. marijuana use among 65 and older has surged nearly 46% from 2021 to 2023, according to research in JAMA. So that's the world we live in now. Is lots more people are.
I was talking to a mutual acquaintance of all of ours, someone we all know from our profession, who's a elder person, and they what they do every day is they take their dog for a walk and get high in the woods. Like that's their day.
Could be
They're
worse.
retired, I assume.
They're mostly retired.
I talked to somebody who
could be worse.
Yeah,
for sure. Yeah,
because somebody who like
sounds pretty great, honestly.
Who takes an edible and then like cozies in to read their book for the evening. Basically, they get high before reading, like at the end of the night, as many of us, who read at the end of the night. I thought, I wonder what's up with that. Anyway,
I'm gonna list out all these things for my own retirement. They all sound like the things to try.
They do. They all sound great. I got to start on the gin martinis, though. I have two quick chatters. One. Courtesy of Slate founder Mike Kinsley. I had dinner with him yesterday, and I was talking to him about this amazing fact that I'm listening to a podcast about the East India Company, and I was talking about the Hudson Bay Company, the oldest company in North America, founded in 1670, and became a series of department store. It went bankrupt this week.
Yes. And
Yes.
you know what? That's so funny because it was actually like front page news and I had never heard of it and said, I can't believe this is a front page news story. And my husband was so irritated because he knew all the history that you're talking about.
Yeah.
It is a big thing.
It's a big thing. It's like it lasted. I mean, it's twice as old as the United States practically. It's incredible. Anyway, so the
Canada.
a great
That's
Canadian
where-
institution.
Yeah, exactly.
The second thing is something I heard from my colleagues at CityCast Salt Lake. My colleague, Ali Vallarta, the host of CityCast Salt Lake, she was talking about something she's interested in. There's a new heartthrob in, well, that's not the right word, but there's a new person, a new heroine in the state of Utah, and actually maybe now across the country, named Julia Reagan. Julia Reagan is a woman who died not long ago, and she was married to a man named Bill Reagan. And Bill Reagan owns a huge outdoor advertising company, and he has plastered the state of Utah and now actually a whole bunch of other states. So there's far away as Minnesota with billboards honoring his late wife, Julia, and photos of her always really dressed up. And, it says, wife, mother, grandmother, or talks about her virtues. And so Julia Reagan has now become this kind of mascot of the state of Utah. And it's really kind of interesting. And unfortunately, there's a slightly dark part of it, which he also seems to be filing a wrongful death lawsuit. And there's a question of whether he is putting up these billboards so that people will sympathize with his wife, so that if he files a wrongful death lawsuit against the hospital, he will get a more favorable jury. But in any case, it's an interesting form of public grief. Listeners, you've got chatters. Please keep them coming. Thank you for sending a nice set of them this week. Please keep them coming by emailing to us at gabfest@slate.com. We could use more of them. And this week's listener chatter comes from Sam Rutledge in Eugene, Oregon.
Greetings, fellow Gabfest listeners. This is Sam Rutledge from Eugene, Oregon. My chatter today is about a worldwide art game called Telephone. I learned about this game because an old friend of mine, and also a Gabfest listener, Nathan Langston, is involved in organizing. The game is based on the classic game of Telephone, where players whisper a phrase into one another's ears around a circle, and at the end, the result is shared, often having been completely transformed. In this game, rather than whispering, players create works of art, which are passed on anonymously from artist to artist around the world. A poem may become a dance transformed into a short film into a painting, and so on. The first Telephone game was played in 2015, and the second, which I had the opportunity to participate in as a poet, happened in 2021 during the height of the COVID years. It's a great, fun way to watch how ideas transform as they move through different imaginations in media. Telephone is accepting applications for artists to participate in their third game, the results of which will be exhibited in October of this year at artists.telephonegame.art.
Of course, we are not the only Slate podcast this week. There are lots and lots of Slate podcasts, and our colleagues at What Next have an episode, Can Zionism Survive This War? And they talk to Isaac Saul, who's the author of I Think I'm Leaving Zionism, or Is Zionism Leaving Me? And it's about the really complicated question that a lot of Jews, and especially American Jews, have grappled with what does it mean to be a Zionist at a time when you find the actions of the state of Israel unsettling or disturbing. So listen to What Next? Can Zionism Survive This War? That's all for our episode this week. We also have a bonus episode in your feed. Trump always chickens out. The taco meme. Is this a useful way of understanding Trump? We're going to talk about that on our bonus episode. That's only for Slate Plus members. However, thank you if you are a Slate Plus member. If you're not, consider joining. You get bonus episodes on the Gabfest and lots of other Slate podcasts. You get discounts to live shows, and you never hit the paywall on the Slate site. So if you are a member, thanks. If you're not, subscribe to Slate Plus directly from the Political Gabfest show page on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, or visit slate.com/Gabfest Plus to get access wherever you listen. That's our show for today. The Gabfest is produced today by Kevin Bendis. Our researcher is Emily Ditto. Our theme music is by They Might Be Giants. Ben Richmond is Senior Director for Podcast Operations. For Emily Bazelon and John Dickerson, I'm David Plotz. Thanks for listening. We will talk to you next week.
Today's episode is sponsored by Smart Travel, a new podcast from NerdWallet. I'm Sally French.
And I'm Megan Coyle. We're travel writers at NerdWallet, and we love helping you make your travel budget work smarter. Because who doesn't love more trips for less money?
People who hate fun, Megan, that's who.
But that's definitely not you, person who is listening to this right now.
On Smart Travel, we don't just hand out travel advice, we break it down. Like, should you get that fancy airline credit card with the huge sign-up bonus? Or is that just a shiny trap leading you to financial ruin?
We have the answers. The answer is, it depends, by the way.
That's why we do the research for you. We crunch the numbers, dissect the fine print, and make sense of loyalty programs so you don't accidentally spend all your hard-earned points on a sad airport hotel booked amidst a canceled flight.
Each week, we tackle real travel questions, like, is travel insurance worth it? How do you spot a good flight deal before it's gone? And can you actually use those random miles your aunt gave you for Christmas? Also, I want that aunt.
Look, we don't just sit here and talk about travel. We live it. I once turned a canceled flight into a free trip to Denver, $200 in United vouchers, and $45 in Starbucks gift cards.
And you were so patient through it all. We've got practical tips, expert interviews, and plenty of hot takes.
I call them hot takeoffs.
To help you travel smarter, not harder. So whether you're planning your next getaway or just love staying ahead of the travel game, follow Smart Travel on your favorite podcast app.
Your passport will thank you, and so will your wallet.